wanted to let you know that on August 31st,
On August the 31st.
On August 31st.
August 31st.
August 31st.
August 31st.
And August 31st.
I will be marching.
I'll be marching.
And I'll be marching.
We'll be marching.
We will be marching.
Because as a mom and a medical professional,
entrepreneur and a mother of three,
I'm a mom and a pharmacist,
and graphic designer,
certified personal trainer and holistic health advocate,
Christian, a nutritionist,
independent journalist, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, and an activist.
I'm a teacher, writer, and mother of 5 vaccine-injured children.
I'm a college graduate.
and I stand.
And I stand.
And I do stand.
And I stand.
And we stand. And I stand.
And I stand against mandatory vaccines.
And I stand against mandatory vaccinations.
Against mandatory vaccinations.
Against mandatory vaccines.
It is not a pro-vaccine march. It is not an anti-vaccine march. It is simply for us to keep our medical freedoms and the right to choose.
Because where there is a risk, there should be a choice.
Where there is a risk, there should be a choice.
Where there is a risk, there must be a choice.
Where there is risk, there must be choice.
Where there is a risk, there is a choice.
If there's a risk involved, there must always be a choice. Where there is a risk, there must be a choice.
If we don't speak up now, it might be too late when we finally want to.
Come out and join us.
How's it going, guys? It's Dev here, joined by Coach B. You know who it be, the man, the myth, the legend. He's over here shaking it hard, you know. Looks, I don't know what that was, honestly. The audience could just imagine what you're doing up there. It looks like I'm not saying anything. And of course,
keep it different.
We're joined today by our special guest, Joshua Bennett. Introduce yourself, Josh.
Hello.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's keep it moving. So we have Josh on the show today because he's part of a movement called Millions March, right?
That's right.
Okay, and that's actually happening tomorrow, and you said you're going to be our correspondent for that, and you're going to give us a little bit of coverage?
Yes.
Okay, so talk with me here. What is Millions March about?
So Millions March is at the core, it's an idea. This is a decentralized movement of people all across the country they're coming together to protest tomorrow vaccine mandates. These are people who have there's a diversity of opinions on the subject, but what we all share in common is that we believe that the right to make your medical decisions starts and ends with you. I don't have the right to make a medical decision for anybody else except my minor children, you know. We stand against mandates for vaccines. There are people who believe in vaccination. There are people who don't believe in vaccination. There are people who are kind of in the middle. You know, there's more than 2 positions on the vaccine issue. There are at least 4 or 5. But what we all share in common is that we do not believe in mandates. We don't believe that the government has the right to tell you what pharmaceutical products you must take, what you must inject into your body. That's up to you.
Right. So I want to take a second to kind of for me and you to define our terms, because we did have a conversation the other day when I spoke with you on the phone. And, you know, we were just saying about what position we really hold, because from my point of view or my perspective, people would say your perspective would be the anti-vax perspective, right? Like maybe you're not with vaccines or you're against them or you're against some of them. Me, I would say I'm pro-vaccination. But again, we chose, and you brought up a valid point about the choice of wording. So I'll let you go ahead and define what you would call yourself and your personal stance on it.
Okay. And just to clarify, when I talk about this part, this is my personal view. I don't speak for anybody else.
And that's what I want. Yep.
Even though the term anti-vaxxer is intended to be pejorative, the more I reflect about this and think about it, I really think that is my personal position. Again, just for me, I don't believe that vaccination should be illegal for people if that's what they want to do necessarily. I don't know how I feel about the issue with children, to be quite honest. But the position I hold is that the best option medically, scientifically, is to avoid vaccines.
Avoid vaccines. See, now I'm of the opinion that it is probably in our better interest to be vaccinated. But the thing is that I look at it from the perspective of we're kind of like Plato's cave, so to speak, where we don't know what the effects would be had we taken all off of vaccines, if we just stopped taking them or not giving them out. If people don't, if people don't get vaccinated, how can we be sure that these things, these viruses, because I know a lot of people of that opposition will say, well, because of sanitation, that's why we're healthier now and we don't need vaccines. And then, but also the sanitation rates increased with the increase of vaccines. So it's hard to really tell what that number really is. So if you quit taking all those things, what's going to happen? Are we going to see outbreaks of diseases that were preventable coming back and hurting and killing people? Are we going to see all these nasty, horrible things? And I am of the opinion that there are negative side effects that do come with vaccination. But it's of that smaller piece or percentage of people. And, and that's why I believe in what we're just saying now is that choice, because there are people who don't want to take the risk of their kids dying from preventable diseases. And also at the same time, I understand the perspective that there's that chance that you could end up with an adverse effect because of your genetic material or how your body's made. So it's really a choice at that point. So that's kind of the perspective that I take. So I wanted to talk with you more about discussing the idea of choice, Josh. So you stated that you have a particular opinion of, that you say you're anti-vax, right? But do you stand by that choice position because you want people to have the freedom of medical choice?
Yes, I don't have any desire to infringe upon somebody else's right to vaccinate if they choose.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about weighing the risks versus the benefits, one of the issues I have is that I don't believe that the CDC is an impartial third party. I believe that the risks of vaccines are downplayed by the CDC. Mm-hmm. The list of contraindications they give is actually quite short. It's only about 4 or 5 different conditions. Anaphylaxis is the most common that you see. But when you, I don't know if you've ever taken the time to look through the vaccine inserts to kind of read the information.
Actually, I have. I don't want to cut you off. Actually, I have, because we did have a guest on the show who was also of this opinion, and she showed me some of the things. It was very interesting just reading some of the adverse effects that can be on there and the percentages, depending on the vaccine, of course. Certain ones have different percentages.
Right. So 2 really interesting things to note. One, if you survey all of the vaccines that are indicated for children in the U.S., they have a very diverse safety portfolio. So some of these vaccines are, I'm trying to think through. I don't have it out in front of me, of course, but like some of the flu shots, the SAEs, the serious adverse events, were reported around 0.01% in the clinical trial. So it's about 1 in 10,000. Mm-hmm. But some of these had alarmingly high rates. Several of them exceed 1%. Mm-hmm. So now we're up to 1 in 100. Mm-hmm. CDC says 1 in a million. So there's a disconnect between
where they don't know
and CDC stats.
That's a huge disconnect.
Because the 2 industries that would be creating those things, those particular vaccines, creating the vaccines and doing the information and getting the information of the adverse effects, they can't agree on what the number actually is. What you're saying?
Yes.
Because those industries would act independently of each other. And what happens is they can't get the exact number. Now,
but this is what they do. The FDA uses the data from clinical trials of the drug manufacturer. Mm-hmm. The CDC uses data from the vaccine court on their website. Mm-hmm. So, if I have, let's say a crime is committed against me, mm-hmm. It happened to me. There you go. If I don't get my day in court, I wouldn't count as a statistic.
So what you're saying is basically the people, unless you don't go to court, then you don't count as a statistic in that trial.
CDC quote, on their website, when you look through vaccine side effects and the rates of these things, it's quote the quote is something like there's 1 adverse effect compensated for in court for every million doses of a vaccine given. Now, I absolutely believe that.
Right. Yeah. If you're going off that number.
But the issue is it?
How many people are going to court?
Well, there's only one court.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying is how many people are going to the court to be heard, because you have all these people that may have adverse effects that are linked to a particular vaccine or so, or what have you. So you're saying that one industry counts that number based on the people that go to court, and then someone else might be actually looking at numbers of things that happen that are adverse.
In a clinical trial setting, yes.
Clinical trials, yes. Okay, so that's where I was just trying to make sure that like I was on the level of understanding of getting where the disconnect is, right? Now, when they test for adverse effects, are they looking at things that are very serious conditions? Are they looking at things that are like, oh, maybe like some inflammation around the area of the injection? What are they counting as the adverse effects?
Very good question. This depends on, and this is spelled out in the clinical trials. If you go to any vaccine insert, when you want to look for this information, you want to look at section 6.1. There are two types. They do a part called solicited adverse events, and then they have unsolicited adverse events. The solicited events are a list of like pre-selected events, like you said, like headache, fever, nausea. Most of them are not so severe. Mm-hmm. Then there are unsolicited events where it's not written on the card that they give to you, mm-hmm. and they'll monitor for so long. But if you go through and you read the inserts, you'll find that these monitoring periods are disturbingly short. The longest monitoring period for any vaccine that's indicated for children in the U.S. for the solicited events is 42 days. 42 days.
Whoa.
And the shortest period is 24 hours. Your Hep B vaccines are 4 days. Gardasil's 14 days. These are, to me, that is not a sufficient monitoring period. And this is what will happen. Now, if you want to fact check this and Google or something, you'll hear the opposite. You'll hear Gardasil was trialed for 5 or 10 years or whatever, but this is what is meant by that. Mm-hmm. Let's say it's New Year's Day, 2000. We're going to do a clinical trial, January 1st, 2000. It's a 10-year study. So we're going to go to the last day of 2009. Okay. The three of us are in the study. We get our shot. They monitor me for 14 days. So if I get my shot on day one of the study, my issue's monitored for 14 days. Okay. And then after that period, I drop off. Now, Gardasil in itself was unique because they monitored for serious adverse events for 4 years. So it's impressive in that sense. But to my knowledge, that's the only one. All the other vaccines for kids in the U.S., the solicited periods are 42 days or less, and the unsolicited, where you just call in and say, hey, I had this happen, some of those are like 1 to 3 months. 1 to 3 months. But they're short periods of time.
So hold on. We're saying that there's just not enough information gathered to give you all around good side effect for a long term, is what we're saying. Let's think of it like this. So is it compared to other drugs that are being put in these test studies and to see the effects of them? Where does vaccines fall on, we'll say, with opiates? Is it shorter? Or are they both on the same type of like timeline, or is one longer than the other, one shorter than the other?
That's a good question. So vaccines are licensed by the FDA, just like other drugs are. But vaccines are not classified as a drug. It's classified as a biological agent. There are different regulatory standards that the manufacturers have to meet, and they're a lot less stringent. Double-blind placebo trials are not required in the same way that they are for drugs. Now, these trials happen, but with vaccine trials, the placebos are other vaccines. That is appropriate when you're doing efficacy trials, when you're comparing one drug or one biological agent to another, like in phase 3 trials. But when you're looking at safety trials, you want to compare the drug to an inactive agent. And instead, they just do the trials like I was telling you about, where they administer the shots and they do monitor.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a
You don't think the period's long enough for them to monitor? They're not monitoring long enough in that
Yes,
regard.
that's correct. And also, they don't monitor against an inert placebo.
Okay, so when you say inert, so they're basically a non-active ingredient placebo.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. So,
And
which is weird because I think that would be the case if you're doing a study. Why wouldn't you run it with a placebo that is inactive? Because then they're getting basically the sugar pill, right? The thing that doesn't even do anything anyway. So how are you supposed to actually test it? You put it with another active agent against another active agent. That doesn't make any sense. Because then the side effects could be different from one person to the other. And
right.
it just screws up your study, I think. Truthfully, if I'm coming at it from a scientific, unbiased position, I mean that's not good in testing for anything.
No, and another good thing to keep in mind. That's a good point. The efficacy trials. See, when I first started reading about vaccines and learning this stuff, I kept hearing people say on social media, "There's no safety trials," or no double blind. They don't use a placebo. And
hold on. Just one misconception to anybody that might be out there in the audience: a double blind is very unethical. I mean, because you would be saying a double blind study. You saying that wouldn't be unethical?
Correct. I'm saying that would not be unethical.
Why?
Who has the right to determine what goes in my body?
You.
Me. So if I am willing, is it right and appropriate to do that study in children? No, I agree with that.
Okay.
But when we extend that out and say, well, we can't do it at all because it's unethical. We hear the same thing. We hear that the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study is unethical.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't agree with that.
For the same reason, because we're withholding life-saving vaccines from people to do this study, but that's just employing a logical fallacy. It's called affirming the consequent.
Right. Right. Because you don't know. Right. And that's what I'm saying. You're saying this is what's going to happen. Right. And I agree with what you're saying to the point that I would say that, I'm saying that I don't know the consequence, but I also have evidence to believe that the consequences could be dire if we are wrong. If you say we're not going to take vaccines, we're not going to do them anymore, or we say we're done with them, right? If everybody collectively as a whole. Because if we do, I mean, the things such as herd immunity, we talk about that, and you may disagree with that point, which, that's fine. But those sort of things, and especially whenever you have evidence of things like, you don't have smallpox anymore, you don't have polio anymore, you don't have all these things that are now vaccinated for, you don't see them in large amounts anymore, where people are having 500,000 people across the country or more have that same disease throughout the year, and then old people are dying from it or what have you. You don't have that anymore. And, again, like I said, you may be able, some people might combat that with something saying as sanitation rates, but how could you possibly say that whenever the sanitation of our environments and everything have progressed as the years as we've had vaccines? So, I don't know. Maybe there is a study for it that would maybe quell that for me, but that's one of those big things. And also, too, that you have immunologists, people who study this, they make careers out of this, and they learn about how the human body works. And there's a lot of times I feel like when we talk about vaccines, it's almost like we're discrediting people. Thousands, because we're not just talking about 5 dudes that work in a lab. Thousands of people who make their livelihood out of studying how our bodies react to different kinds of dead viruses and medical marvels to better our health. Thousands of people. And it'd be crazy to say, oh, immunologists, all these people that went to school for 8 years and became doctors don't know what they're talking about.
Well, that brings up a good question, Dev. Is there immunologists that are on the other side saying the same thing, that just as many of those people saying that it's not good?
I don't. Go ahead. Finish your question.
They're saying it's not good. There's just as many.
I don't disagree that there probably are immunologists that say that. Now, do I know if there's just as many? Don't know.
Sure.
You'd have to run some kind of statistical survey to figure out what that number is in comparison and ask immunologists.
But they're there.
Yeah, but I would say that there are, but I think they're maybe going to probably lean towards the point that I have more so that, yes, there are adverse effects that come with vaccines, and because of every human being different, made up of different genetic material, their bodies are all made differently in a certain way, where the majority of people may react the positive way and then have that immunity, and then they never feel any of the side effects again. But there is a very large majority of people also, or not, I wouldn't say very large, but I'm saying there's a percentage of people that are going to have adverse effects, and whether that's maybe saying, I'll give you a second, Josh, for just 1 minute. Like I said, I was listening to you talk, so I just want to finish my point on this. Is that, oh God, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, that there's this other people, and whether that adverse effect is maybe like you have the flu afterward, or inflammation around the area of the shot, or a headache, or if it's some kind of maybe debilitating thing, or a disease because your immune system starts an autoimmune disease, especially something similar to that. And that's what I mean by, again, why I agree with pro-choice. Just like also I don't agree with flu shots, because the time to develop a flu shot, how can they make a shot that is vaccinated for the next strain of flu whenever they don't know how it's going to mutate? Because viruses and bacteria and all those things, when their genetic material is replicated so many times, how are you able to predict a mutation like that? And I mean, and maybe that's just me being ignorant. I don't know that information personally, because I'm not an immunologist and I don't study all that. But I'm saying, just based off the general understanding that I have, is that warranted to believe?
Well, I think you're correct on your last point there, is that they kind of take their best guess. A lot of times they'll look at what strain was bad last year. They'll develop their shot, and
But you're making shots for viruses that existed last year because of the flu. Like I said, I mean, the reason why it's still around is because it's a highly contagious and very versatile. It's able to transform itself after its replication, and it always comes out in different strains. So that's why things like the flu, the common cold, etc., are always around, those kind of infections.
One of the you were talking a minute there about reaction rates, adverse reaction rates.
Yeah.
So 12 years ago, 2007, an insurance company called Harvard Pilgrim something. I don't remember the name
Harvard
of it.
Pilgrim, whatever it is. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
an insurance company. It's not, and it's in Boston. I don't know if it's affiliated with the university or not, or it's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I think. HHS and CMS put together a study and had them perform it because there was a suspicion that vaccine injuries are underreported. So what they did was they performed their own vaccine study, and the only major difference that they did versus like what happens in FDA pre-licensure clinical trials is they monitored for these reactions for 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to guess that their injury rate was?
I'm not sure. Let me go with
low.
20%.
Not 20,
okay,
but 10. It's 9.5%. Now, in the report says 2.6% because in the report they look at they use for the denominator the number of vaccines. Now, I have an issue with that. If we're looking at injuries and adverse events, we need to use for our denominator the number of people. Because if you get 10 shots and you get an injury from one of them, you're one person. It's silly to say 10 shots. I mean, my injury was from one shot when I was 27.
Mm-hmm.
I had many vaccines before as a child, and I believe I've suffered some adverse outcomes from that. Nothing that was debilitating or life-changing.
Yeah, right.
That wasn't the case when I was 27. So when you're looking at when you're doing population health, when you're looking at something like this, you don't measure public health in terms of injuries divided by drugs. When we're looking at like iatrogenic illness, you do injuries divided by people.
The number of people that were in the study. Yeah, of course.
So in that, you're looking at about 9.5%. And the only real difference in this study versus these clinical trials is that they lengthened for most of these drugs, it's a lengthening of the study period to 30 days.
Right. Now, and this is just a criticism that I may have because I am of this background. So allow me to go on my tangent. Me myself, I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, self-diagnosed hypochondriac, if that's not an oxymoron in and of itself. So, I believe like sometimes I feel sick when I don't. I have pain when I don't. I'm a worrywart sometimes whenever I have a pain or what have you. I was actually just sick with mononucleosis. That I had it for like several weeks. I still probably have it in my system. Do you know what mono? You know mono. Everybody knows mono, right? The kissing disease. Don't know who I was kissing that had mono, but she had it. So, regardless, I'm a bit of a worrywart when it comes to these kind of things. So when I think about having mononucleosis and all the things that came with it, I had all kinds of different aches and pains and inflammations and stuff, and I thought it was something more serious. And every time I would go to the doctor, I'd say, I feel like it's something more serious. So they did this, like the one day, I thought I had a blood clot or something wrong with my lung because I got this pain when I was breathing all the time. Right? And they took me in, they thought I might have a blood clot in my lung, did a CT scan, and they went through and like, there's no blood clot with your lung, it's just some inflammation, right? And at that point, I said, okay, and because I'm still that way, I went to the doctor again to get a second opinion, and then they explained to me the process of how, like, if there was something wrong with your lung, the CT scan would have showed it. And after 2 or 3 days, I was completely fine, right? Now, I only say that to say this because when we're talking about these studies that do look for adverse effects, right? Are we saying, now I am curious because you'll probably specify for me after I make this point, but if it's something, say like they monitor within 30 days and someone says they get a headache and then they attribute that to a vaccine, right? Or maybe they get sick or something, and then you're attributing that to the vaccine, does that mean that the vaccine caused that? I mean, because that's my thing, is I don't believe that correlation means causation, and the majority of people, that's the thing, the majority of people are vaccinated. So then whenever you have people that take vaccines, and then they have some kind of illness or sickness or something around the time that happens, right? Is it just a coincidence? Is it just correlation? Are these things actually happening? And it's hard to tell because, again, I agree that sometimes that is the case. But other times I think, is it just a matter of something happened around that time? Because throughout our lives, we do get within, probably like 30, 20-something shots before we hit a certain age. I mean, younger kids now, it's a lot more. But, like, from my age of perspective, it's like 25 or something.
Yeah.
So we're getting shots pretty much throughout our childhood. But go ahead.
How do we know when sometimes correlation is never causation, but sometimes
you are right if you're going to say something. If you're going to say something about correlation, you are right, because if correlations can show signs of causation. But the problem is you still have to figure out the determining factor for is it actually as a cause.
Well, you have to try to look for it in the first place. You'll never find what you're not looking for. So when you think about good epidemiological practice, there may or may not be a causal relationship when there is a temporal relationship. A temporal relationship is something we might call a coincidence. Mm-hmm. I'm wearing an orange shirt today and it's Friday and it was sunny. Well, next Friday, I'll wear an orange shirt and it's sunny. And the next Friday, I wear an orange shirt and it's sunny. So we have a temporal association between if I wear an orange shirt on a Friday, it's sunny.
Right.
Is there a causal relationship there? Probably not.
Right, exactly. I don't know. Maybe you checked the Weather Channel and you were like, today's a sunny day. I'm going to wear the orange shirt again today. And then you want people to think about that. Yeah, no, I'm good.
I didn't make it sunny. So when we do these studies, we will find a temporal association if it's there, a coincidence. Now, the question you're asking is good. Is there a causal relationship there? Mm-hmm. To determine that, to answer that question, you need to do a prospective study in real time for a long time and watch and wait. We don't do that. Like in the vaccine arena, a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study would answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, allowing more people to be unvaccinated or letting the people be unvaccinated and let them have that study. Yeah, I agree with that. Because that would be the only way to really find that answer out, because you would have to see.
Right. So what we then end up coming to is we have to ask ourselves, why are there thousands of studies that, they say, well, there's no causation, but they don't even ask the questions. They don't do like we look at the Denmark study that was big early this year. That was in the news. A guy named Anders Havid, he works with the Staten Serum Institute in Copenhagen, Denmark, and they did a retrospective review of they used information from like the Danish Medical Registry from 1999 to 2010. And the study was allegedly to determine if there was a link between MMR and autism. And they said no link. But what they did was they looked at, two large groups of people. One group had 11 shots.
Right.
Denmark had 12. This group had 11. They didn't have the MMR. And this other group had 12. And they said, well, these two types of people seem to be about the same. No correlation. That kind of study, they're not even going to have
because
ARB approval to answer the question in the first place.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I agree with you is that if you have people, and I was thinking of that before you even said it, but if you have people that have had 11 shots before they even do the test, well, then how could you even know which shot was the one that caused it? Because who knows? Hell, I'm going to give you that, 9 out of the 11 vaccines were safe and good vaccines. But then you have 2, and how would you know which 2 were the ones that had the negative impact on people? You wouldn't know because you have no way of knowing. And I agree with that. And that's what I'm saying. The only way you can do that is to have that. And that's why, I agree with having that choice, especially whenever you're in a hospital. I know at young ages, kids are given vaccines right off from bat, Now, I don't believe now this is just me personally, just looking at the data that I've seen. I don't believe that oh god, what the hell is it? It's like the instant infant death one. I can't think of what it's called. What do they call it? SIDS. I don't think that SIDS is caused by vaccines. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's just probably something that happens with that they're healthy, but something's not working correctly, or something happens, I don't know, abruptly being outside of them. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I don't think it's vaccines. And like I said, and that's fine. You could contest me on that. I don't want to feel like this is the problem I didn't want to have with this conversation, and I want to do it for the next time we do the show. I want to have, presentable fact, because I don't want to make everybody feel like we're just throwing facts at each other. Because it's hard to keep track of all the statistics. You know what I mean?
Well, I know. I almost feel like because whenever you do try to talk with people, you almost feel like it's like, here's my footnote, because it's hard,
right?
But
let me ask you this. That's a perfect question for this. Is saying the choice thing, which is my battle. Like I believe it, and then it helps me learn more about what people's precise battle is, whether it's injustice, the vaccine, and getting the information that I can. But I'm definitely all for the choice thing. Is saying that, going out there and like your opening statement is basically saying, I'm fighting for choice, but here's the information. Is that easier than just saying vaccination, right? Do you find that you're going to be able to have more conversations like you and Dev are having because you say, I want to fight for the choice instead of just coming out and saying, hey, don't vaccinate? Is it easier to get in conversations with people like you're about to say, or is it about the same?
Well, like I said earlier, I don't have any stake or claim like on Dev's medical decisions. Now, I have a serious problem when somebody wants to if somebody were to tell him he's not allowed to do X, Y, or Z when he wants to.
Or that he has to do X, Y, or Z.
He has to if he doesn't want to. Yeah, either way. Couple observations. One, I think when you get away from the keyboard, which I know we're talking on a computer, but we're talking face to face. When you have conversations like this, a lot of what we see in the media is this: we're pitted against each other, and the reality is this is a spectrum. There's a diversity of opinions all right throughout the spectrum, and for Americans are mature enough to have mature conversations, respectful conversations about vaccination or anti-vaccination or the science or the medical issues or the ethical concerns or whatever. So, like, to your point, Lauren, when I talk to people, I don't tell them, hey, the first thing on my mouth is, hey, vaccines are bad and I think it's a bad choice. Yeah. it kind of just depends on who you're talking to. Maybe that will come up, maybe it won't, but
it's more of a to get the conversation. You can judge by who you're going to be talking with and maybe get the information by saying it a different way, different times. I think that is like so I'm getting the answer of, so it's, if I open up, I'm not sure who I'm talking with right away, so I go with the choice thing and kind of gradually get into the vaccination. Is it like a conversation starter too, is what I'm saying? I know that that's your goal. You don't want to tell people what to do. You're just saying, here's the information. I'm just wondering, is that a different approach? Because I see people that get something that maybe will use vaccination, that they're just saying vaccination is bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, and then they just shut off the conversation from us, from people having a conversation like we're having, because they're just jumping in saying that bad word, that taboo word of vaccination, and it's just gonna start the clashing. And that's what I'm kind of wondering, like, when you guys, what this event is about, totally is about. So you guys are going down there to not necessarily say don't use vaccination, it's the choice. That's the fight you're going down there with. I was just trying.
Yeah, we're talking about choice, and we're talking about, for people who are interested, a lot of us are going to be bringing literature to hand out. We're talking about risk. My allegation is that this is tobacco science 2.0. Okay, so we knew people were sounding the alarm at the end of the 1930s. They were saying, look, man, we think cigarette smoking and lung cancer, we think there is a causal relationship between these two. And as we all know, now there is. I mean, it's almost axiomatic. But it took, physicians were recommending cigarettes well into the 1950s. And it's not because physicians are dumb. It's not because they're liars. It's not because they're out to get you. But physicians are technicians. They do diagnostic work. They rely on the latest medical research. But as we know now, there was a serious problem in the translational research process for cigarettes in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, because of the financial conflicts of interest. The New England Medical Journal used to run advertisements for cigarettes as a health product. So there's money getting in the way of that.
Yeah.
I believe we're having the same issue here. The translational research process. Translational research is the bench to bedside. It's the process, what happens to get the information to the doctor when it gets to him. What happened in that process from the bench or the laboratory to the bedside. I think we're having that issue again. I think that the trial data is not good a lot of times because the studies aren't long enough. We are not even trying to answer questions of causation. We don't do these studies. They get IRB approval for like ecological studies, for association studies only. They'll find an association, they'll find a signal, and then that's it. That's where you end up with the post-marketing experience in your section 6.2 of your insert. So if you look at the insert, you'll have 6.1, which has like the trial, you've got the events, the SAEs, you've got the injury rates or whatever. And then in 6.2, you've got reported conditions from the public. And for every vaccine, there's always a lot more in 6.2 than 6.1. Now that makes sense because you're doing this with a lot more people. It's the public just saying, I had this reaction.
Right.
Millions of people are doing this. But so this is what happens. What they're not doing is they're not going back with the information in the 6.2 that's like being reported to VAERS. They're not going back and saying, we're getting a lot of reports, with the Tripedia vaccine. There were reports of autism. And in 2010, Hannah Polling's father, John, who was a physician, won $1.5 million in our vaccine court because it was made clear to the judge that her autism was vaccine induced. So that's how I believe that ended up on the Tripedia insert in 2010, 2011. The next year, Tripedia was taken off the market. But nobody ever went back and said, okay, we have a signal here. You know, CDC already knew about this. In 2001, they had a signal. It was a different vaccine. It was the MMR vaccine. They had a signal. There was what you would call a coincidence, a temporal association. And they couldn't make the data go away. You know, Robert F. Kennedy was talking about this the other day. He says he has emails from, I think, Verstatten. It's the Verstatten study, where they're trying to make it go away. Colleen Boyle, and they're saying, well, we can't make it go away. So in 2004, they all got together at the CDC, and there was another study that they did in Atlanta, where they found a statistically significant correlation between MMR and autism in African American males aged 3 and under. So what they did was they manipulated the data by eliminating all males that didn't have a valid Georgia birth certificate. That's a non sequitur.
That just doesn't make any sense.
No sense.
Just to reduce the numbers.
No, and what's it's fudging the numbers. Yes.
Yeah. So money's fudging the numbers.
But I was gonna say this. But again, your point to me about these particular correlations, and again, I don't mean this in an offensive way, to me is moot because of the point that you actually brought up earlier when you said about how, again, we're all taking different vaccines. How are we supposed to know from a direct correlation that these are the particular case? Is it because these effects or whatever happen right after? And also, again, is there a specific symptom, adverse effect that's like happening consistently? It's the same exact one like every time, you know, like that's what I'm trying to get at. Because again, like I said, I don't think the evidence is very good for that, and I think the only way for us to know is based on exactly what you said, is we would have to have a demographic of people who have never been vaccinated, right? Yep. Versus and living in the sanitary conditions we live in. And you'd have to have those people against a group of people who have been vaccinated all their lives. And really, at that point, like I said, most of us that are in the audience today have had some form of vaccination. I would say so. I mean, the majority of us, the people that are in the audience, you know, and that's not a knock on anybody. Maybe someone in here doesn't. But I'm just saying that you've probably been vaccinated, so it's going to be hard. You would almost have to start this study and then complete it within 20 years from now.
Well, see, that's going on now. So in 2017, a pilot study was published. Jackson State University in Mississippi. Forgot the gentleman's first name, but it's
all right.
Colloquially called the Mawson study. It was a survey of health outcomes in vaccinated versus unvaccinated children ages 6 to 12, and they found in the vaccinated group, you know, you had chronic illness was like 2.4 times as likely to happen in the vaccinated group. Autism was 4.2 times as likely to occur. ADHD 4 times as likely. Allergic rhinitis 30 times more common in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group. Now, it was a small pilot study. There are some issues with the study that could have been cleaned up a little bit with some of the survey and the monitoring process, but that is a signal. So now there are much larger studies underway. I am a volunteer with a group called IPAC. It's the Institute of Pure and Applied Knowledge. They are reviewing data from a much larger vaccinated versus unvaccinated study right now. And no matter what this data yields, it will be published. If this data proves us wrong, it will still be published. If it proves us right, it will be published. If it is not conclusive, it will be published. But the difference between this study and the studies that the pharmaceutical industry funds is that this study has IRB approval to answer these causation questions. Because we want to know causation.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is like, that's why I can't definitively tell you that I am like anti-vaccination, only because I can't make that decision one way or the other. I just have all the things that I have, right? Because we're both looking at the same information, but we're looking at it at two different risks. Because I'm looking at, I don't know if that's really what's causing these things to happen to people, right? You know, I mean, hell, you know, people could say something crazy, you know, Alex Jones stuff like the 5G cell phone towers are rotting our brains and making us crazy, or, you know, causing what kind of illness, right? But I'm saying that until I know a causation, I don't have enough evidence for me to say, yes, we need to be anti-vax. Or I need to be anti-vax, sorry, because, like I said, it doesn't really bother. Because really, to me, I have no dog in the fight besides my own personal opinion and my own beliefs on it, right? Because everybody's trying to figure out it by looking at the same information. And right now, we just don't have, to me, I don't think we have the right information to make that causation claim. But I did want to just jump back because we are starting to get closer to that time where we want to wrap the show up. But I did want to get back to the Millions March and say I think this is amazing what you guys are doing. Because I think it's a slippery slope. Once we give people the ability to tell us what we can put in our bodies or what we have to put in our bodies, we've lost. Because then we can be manipulated and made to do whatever the medical community or the government, whoever it be, and say this is what you have to have, or else you can't go to school, you can't get an education, or you can't do whatever it is that you can't do without it, maybe not like kill you on the street, but they'll say you have to get this or else you can't function in society, and that's when you've lost as a society. You're controlled, I think.
We agree.
That's awesome.
So that right there, that's bridging the gap. See,
that's bridging the gap.
Conversation. Again, Josh, Coach, did you have any other questions?
No, I just have one thing to say. I was trying to get let you guys go ahead and talk, and but I think it sounds like from both sides, me looking at it, what I would like to see is the policy changes for more tests to get the missing variables for the information to be more correct and broader, and everybody has that information to talk instead of just using one side. And that's what we're doing right here. And we encourage people to do that. Show each other the information, and we're going to do something like that down the line when you come in and sit down, and we'll get something together that with a length and more information, and then we'll present that. So definitely appreciate what you guys are going out there to do to fight for the choice. I truly believe in that. You guys tune in tomorrow because you'll be coming from us live down at the event at 2 p.m. Is that right?
If I can figure out how to, yeah. If I can get my typewriter to work, yes, I will.
Yeah, like I said, if you have your phone with the Skype app on it, we'll just call you at 2 o'clock, and then that's all you need to do. Just answer. Just answer. And we'll have it. We'll set
and
it
then
up.
Try to keep the phone as steady as possible, whatever, and then we'll just see what's going on. You give us a live update to all the viewers.
Right, and it doesn't have to be very long either. I mean, we'll probably just pop up 10, 20 minutes, if that, and be like, hey, what's going on? Show us what's going on. And then just, maybe just show us some shots of the stuff that's happening there,
Sounds good.
Yeah, like I said, but I'm ready to wrap this up. I just wanted to, again, say that this has been a great Bridging the Gap moment. This is kind of what we're all about. We've had people that in the past, we've had conversations with people that are in maybe the anti-vax department, and I have my beliefs on it, but they think that I'm going to, people, because I have a pro-vax opinion, are going to attack the opposition and whatnot. But really, we have very similar questions and concerns, but one of us just sees the other thing, one sees less risks than the other on the other side. If I'm getting that correctly, that's where I see us at. One of us sees more risk taking one side than the other, which is fine. And like you said, it exists within a spectrum. I'm trying to center myself, a spectrum. So in all these little incremental pieces. So Josh, again, I applaud you for coming on, and I'm glad, because for some people this is really brave, man, to come on here. But I'm glad we're having this conversation, and it's great because it needs to be had.
Yep.
It needs to be had.
Agree.
Okay. So anything else you wanted to say, Josh?
Not at all. I you guys have kind of summed it up well. I think that the public needs to have this discussion. I will tell you, I think the mainstream media fears this discussion. I think the government fears this discussion. And I think the medical industry fears this discussion. They fear an intelligent, reasonable, calm discussion between people like you, Dev, and people like me.
Mm-hmm. And not even just on these kind of issues of any sort, because they want to keep us, coaches say divisive. Yeah. They want to keep us fighting.
Just you got it.
Right. Yeah. So like I said, that's
and this is just a fight that adds to the overall fight of not letting them take certain things away from us and help us combat things that we see as injustice. And I just believe anybody that makes somebody do something, especially to a child that's looking for their parent to make the best decision for them, they need all the information that they can have to make that decision and not just be forced to do something.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree with that. All right, guys. Well, wrapping up the show. Again, everybody that stopped by, thank you so much for watching and tuning in. I'm actually going to play the clip that we played at the beginning just for the outro, so if anybody didn't see it when the stream first started, they can go and watch it again. But again, you guys have been great. Awesome. Josh, I'm glad you were here. Bridging the Gap, we're out of here. Take care of yourselves. See you, everybody. See you. Have a good one.
Right.
Wanted to let you know that on August 31st.
On August 31st.
On August 31st.
August 31st.
August 31st.
August 31st.
And August 31st.
I will be marching.
I'll be marching.
And I'll be marching.
We'll be marching.
We will be marching.
Because as a mom and a medical professional,
Entrepreneur and a mother of 3.
I'm a mom and a pharmacist.
And a graphic designer.
Certified personal trainer and holistic health advocate.
Christian, a nutritionist.
Independent journalist. I'm a writer. I'm an artist and an activist.
I'm a teacher, writer, and mother of 5 vaccine-injured children.
I'm a college graduate.
And I stand.
And I stand.
And I do stand.
And I stand. And we stand.
And I stand.
And I stand against mandatory vaccines.
And I stand against mandatory vaccinations.
Against mandatory vaccinations.
Against mandatory vaccines.
It is not a pro-vaccine march. It is not an anti-vaccine march. It is simply for us to keep our medical freedoms and the right to choose.
Because where there is a risk, there should be a choice.
Where there is a risk, there should be a choice. Where there is a risk, there must be a choice.
Where there's risk, there must be choice.
Where there is a risk, there is a choice.
If there's a risk involved, there must always be a choice. Where there is a risk, there must be a choice.
If we don't speak up now, it might be too late when we finally want to.
Come out and join us.